Um, I was definitely more cautious. I remember, as we went into 2019, I was more, I don't want to say I was more like inquisitive about how the different pieces all slotted together, but like one of the things that you don't realize, if you've never planned a giant convention, dear listener, is like how many moving pieces there are. And I mean, you can certainly see that as a fan and an attendee, but when you're planning it, it's, you know, the minute details account for everything, including, something as trivial as like where the outlets in a panel room are, to how long it actually takes to walk from one place to another is not something that you really account for. I remember the bane of my fucking existence in 2018 was like shipping stuff to the building. We do a lot of shipping to the building, and if you're working with lots of partners, they're shipping stuff to the building. And the one thing that I didn't know was, if you don't be very, very specific on the shipping label where in the convention center you want that box to go, it just goes somewhere. Nobody knows. It could go anywhere in our case in McCormick Place in Chicago, which is like one of the largest convention centers in the world. And so you're literally running around this gigantic convention center that takes, like, I've clocked it. It takes like 12 minutes to walk from one end to the other, literally looking for a box, like a small tiny box that has cards in it that you need to give the MC, or has a literal needle in a haystack. And like, we didn't know what we didn't know. And so next year, you better believe I was crystal fucking clear with everybody what they had to write on the shipping label and where where those boxes were. And you know what? No boxes got lost. And I didn't have to cart heavy boxes around the convention center either.
My job with C2E2 was to sell the sales floor, the actual booth space itself. And as salespeople do when you have 525 clients or so, you do your best to communicate with all of them. But, there's a relative hierarchy in terms of the amount of contact you have to give to each client, because there's only so much time in a day, right? So, a couple of these clients, I happened to, do the very simple sort of thing of moving their booth space from one place to another, not accounting for the idea that, some of them may be accustomed to being in a certain space, and, some of them may be sending someone that's not themselves to represent the business that has bought the space. I remember it was 6:00, again, on the worst day of my life. We're almost done, thank God. And the last thing I find out is that there are two people literally fighting over a 10 by 20 booth space on my show floor. And they're, these two young ladies are physically engaged in what I can only describe as combat. And no, it was not mortal, I don't believe. But I remember me and Mike Nagan going over there, breaking it up, and then
combat with a K or with a C.
This poor woman move her, 25 or 30,000 pounds worth of anime and manga from one corner of the convention center all the way to the other corner, so that she didn't have to do it herself. And, it was that moment that I went, I am never going to move a booth without letting an exhibitor know that I did it ever again. And it was just pure laziness, really was. But it was, oh, what's the worst that could happen here? Well, I found out.
Yeah, man. Like when you have something that complex, and like, I'm not gonna say, we always like to say that we're not curing cancer. Like putting on a pop culture convention isn't brain surgery. But when you have something that complex, be it a pop culture convention or a complex
Yeah,
machine of any
I always
kind,
think that
when it's got that many moving
people are
pieces,
so amazed when I
one
tell
that
them
is a little
what it
off
is that
center
we
or
do,
one that gets
because
changed has a
when you say
cascading
out loud,
effect.
I put on conventions like New York Comic Con, which we both can say now. But like, their eyes get wide and they're like, "What? That's so awesome!" But I think it's because I'll give Lynn a call after we're off here. Um, but
You
it's
should tell
mainly
that to my
because,
parents
especially
who
the
still
people
have
who
no
react
fucking idea what I do.
positively when you tell them what you do, it's mostly because they don't know the dirty bits. You got any
Yeah.
stories
Yeah,
about
please.
something gross on site that people just don't realize that you have to do? Gross, dirty, just like down in the muck. Like, look, Chris, for the uninitiated, Chris, I don't know exactly how you would. That's a good
Gross
exercise.
on site.
How do you explain what you do to people who don't know what you do?
I mean, I usually just say I organize comic conventions. That's usually my log line. If they ask for more detail, I say that I handle the panels and programming at Comic Con, at New York Comic Con, at all, and I lists all the shows that we purvey in. So I mean, as far as like dirty bits, um, there's not like there's not a ton of like really like raunchy stuff that we have to do on site, or maybe there is and I've just been beaten down to a stub that it doesn't bother me anymore, because I've just kind of always I, it's so cliche and like shitty to say, but like I've always been oh, there's no job too dirty. There's we're a team. Like I've always just been that kind of a person, and it's corny and it's cliche, but that's the case. I mean, as far as just like fun horror stories, like I mean, we instituted late night programming for the first time in any real capacity. So for those of you who don't know, C2E2, the show we work on in Chicago, is in downtown Chicago, but there's not really anything around there. The convention center is so big and it's in this mega complex of just a bunch of hotels. There's no real nightlife. So we decided for the first time to really like just do late night programming. So late night panels, dance contest, like a cosplay after party type stuff, all with alcohol available for purchase and food, like convention center food and stuff. And it's unreasonable of you to ask yourself or your staff to stay there till the last person leaves, because they could stay there all night if they really wanted to. So we usually would cut out around 11. Programming would maybe go into 1. And security would stay. Don't get me wrong. Like it's not like the wolves were in the hen house. Like nobody was getting stabbed or anything. But you would come in the next morning and see the sloppy carnage of the 2 hours which you were not there. And like there's some stuff where like, somebody dropped a full pan pizza off the top floor down to the 4th floor and it's face down on the carpet. There's throw up everywhere. There's garbage. And like, you've got to get everything ready because panels are starting for Sunday morning in, an hour. So you've got to clean up a little bit. You could wait for custodial staff or you could do it yourself because, like things got to get done. So like just stuff
There's
like
that
that.
Yonkers and you coming out hard work
Yeah,
all day.
I don't know. I don't really believe in like dirty jobs. I believe in jobs
when I talk
that
to
need to
people
get done
about
and who's going to do them.
My first experience with ReedPop,
Yeah.
working a show at New York Comic Con in 2018, I often tell them that I didn't get it until we got on site at New York, and then I started to understand the, and I hate this buzzword, but the culture at ReedPop, that's when I really started to understand and it started to click for me. And how I've explained it ever since is that in a very real sense, we do all the planning and we get all that stuff put together and we work very hard throughout the year, but 4 times a year essentially with these 30 to 50 people you go to war. And that's the best way I have to describe it. It's a little 3 or 4 day war that you go to, and it's got to be highly organized.
Oh, it's brutal, dude. It's brutal. The war analogy is so perfect.
And here's the interesting thing, because we come out of these shows incredibly tired and worn out, and like what I imagine, maybe not the violence aspect, right, but certainly the dedication of man hours and uh, the deep sort of passionate work of war. Uh, it wears at you in a way that nothing that I've ever done ever has. And as a result, you start to build a sort of camaraderie with the people that you work with. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I don't know about you, but and I don't want to make this a puff piece or anything like that, but I want to try to get across that aspect of what we do because I think it's very important for people to understand that uh, we have a connection with the people we work with that's so strong because we are forged by that work, right? Essentially, I've heard it said from I think it's Christina Rogers, who's one of our event directors at ReedPop, and she talks about it likening what we do to building a city in 2 days and then tearing it down 3 or 4 days later. And I don't believe it's inaccurate. I want you to talk a little bit about how you feel about that in general, that whole thing that I just preambled with, but the importance of it when you're a part of a company like this in terms of your loyalty.
Oh God, it's everything. Um, I've worked at some good places. I've worked at some bad places, and I've worked at some really bad places as far as uh, corporate culture. And in terms of employee wellness and looking out for your fellow man and woman. The it's funny, the worst places that I've worked in that way also happen to be some of the biggest companies on the planet. And I think that there's a direct correlation there. But as far as ReedPop goes, what I always like to say is the worst day at ReedPop is still better than the best day at any other job I've ever had, and I mean that. Um, it, there's something to be said for that crackling energy that you brought up of when you get on site that is so hard to put into words and so hard to quantify. But there's this camaraderie, there's this brothers and sisters in arms type of feeling, that you're ready and you're going to war, and it's going to take its toll on you, but you've got your other people in the trench that you can lean on. And I've never had that anywhere I've ever been. It's why, and I mean, we can get into this too, but we went through a lot of layoffs in COVID, due to COVID. I mean, we are a live events company that hasn't ran any live events in a year. We're recording this on March 1st, the what would have been the final day of C2E2 a year ago. And because of that camaraderie, like it, those layoffs hit harder than anything I've ever experienced in my professional life. It was like losing family. I mean, in a lot of ways. And it's just it hurt. It still hurts. It still hurts to think about and to talk about. Like, there was a lot of really good people who we worked with, who we shared those bonds with in that trial by fire. and you know,